Flow with the show. Hey, this is Flow with the show. Welcome to episode number 7. We've got a very special one today. This is special for so many reasons. Firstly, hello, I am Toronto electronic music vocalist Flo Anastasia, and with me today, a very special guest, Toronto producer, DJ, man of many talents, including pro audio genius, video, photography, an overall amazing guy, Tyr Kohout. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Well, being here, speaking of being here, another reason that this show is extra special is because this is our first podcast episode that we're like in person and not on Zoom.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
It's a nice change.
Right? Like, hello.
What is that painting of
For those of you who are just listening in, Tyr and I are in this little kind of cabin up in cottage country. One of the reasons that we're up here is to shoot a music video for Sofa Sound. Oh my gosh, I had to wear the shirt. Sofa Sound is an amazing label out of Bristol, and it's our first ever music video for an upcoming track, but we can talk about that a little bit later. Thank you so much for just agreeing to do this podcast episode, by the way. You and I have chatted about doing an episode together. This is cool that we were sort of able to make it happen up here, having like all the gear and all the cameras and that kind of thing. So there's a lot we can talk about. For those of you who don't know, Tyr is one of my closest creative partners. He's my vocal engineer. He does all my vocal recordings. When I perform, he DJs with me. He is also a big instrumental part of actually running this podcast. So for all the audio processing and the color correction, touching up all the video footage and stuff, that's actually Mr. Tyr Kohout over here that does that. So hey, how are you?
Oh, I'm great. Well, no, I think it's good. It's I think fitting that I'd at least spend some time on the show. Watch every small and big detail of all the other ones. So it's like, why not be actually on here myself? Yeah,
absolutely. You'll be processing your own audio. You'll be color correcting.
Oh, I look forward to doing 3 cameras.
Oh my gosh.
No, it's great. It's a good experience, and I think it's a good exercise in like getting the chops up as well, because like you only get better at that stuff if you're actually doing it all the time. Especially I've learned a lot of techniques for dealing with like back and forth on the microphone, like compensating for that kind of thing, and it's maybe it has helped me appreciate how good other stand-up specials are, especially when you watch someone with no mic control holding the microphone on stage. It's just any whichever direction there. It's just kind of there. May as well not even be there with how they're using the microphone. And the fact that there are so many specials that sound like you couldn't tell where the microphone was if you were to kind of just turn the TV off and just listen to how the sound was. It doesn't change almost at all. And that's that type of voodoo. I didn't realize how hard that is to make a microphone sound the same. No, almost, obviously within reason, but like almost no matter where it is. And to make that seamless is kind of like where we watch Big Up Corridor Crew. We watch their videos on VFX all the time.
Yes.
And there are so many episodes in. I remember when we started, it was probably like in the single digits as far as what episode they were on. But
yeah, they're like 5 million subscribers now.
Yeah, something crazy like that. And they have really shown us, I think, how incredibly difficult it is to make high-level VFX in movies. You sort of think, well, it's easy to think, well, it's big Hollywood budgets, everything's going to be of a certain caliber. You get very numb to high production level values like that until you try it yourself.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is actually really hard.
It's also one of those things where you like don't notice unless it's like bad, or like bad VFX, bad sound, like, that kind of thing. And then when it's good, like as you're saying, the sort of like the mic control, that's something that I had no concept of like even being a thing, and like compression and like dynamic control and that kind of thing until I myself, had my first mic performance, and I'm like, oh, this is
even the smallest movement will change it, right? Imagine how many, like a foot or more. So It's been a really good learning experience working on the show with you, and also to see your breadth of knowledge and experience increase with the guests that you have on the show as well. So I think you deserve a big props for just handling really high level guests with such grace and like keeping it together. As far as I can tell, I mean, I'm sure you'll have a different opinion, but no, I feel like you've done a great job of making people feel welcome, that, you know, you may have this thing of, oh, this is some high level guest, I'm not sure how to deal with this kind of thing, I'm so nervous, but at least as far as I can tell, it comes across just very genuine, like you do kind of have like an eye level conversation with people, and that's very hard to do.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. And I mean, you've also helped me learn a lot about just like sort of on the topic of like mic control and that kind of thing. Like I thought I was good at speaking to people and striking up conversation, but the whole like technology aspect and just hearing you like process the audio from the past episodes and like how many times I like say right or like inhale sharply or like in my reaction, like when in a normal conversation, like this isn't something that you would like really necessarily pick up on, but like when it's recorded and just it's, you know, sometimes like after an episode I'll be like, oh, you know, that went great, and then we'll go into like editing and I'm like, oh, this so anyways, thanks for bearing with me, folks, fine folks who have been enjoying the podcast so far. And yeah, I just want to thank you again, Tyr, for being here, because you've been such a pivotal role, not only in the podcast, but in my whole just like journey with recording drum and bass vocals. You know, we've done a lot of creative things together and stuff. So I don't even know where to start this conversation. Like, how did you get to be so proficient, let's say, in, you know, sound and for, you know, I have so many questions for you.
Fair enough. I think this kind of falls in the realm of unanswerable in a nice way, because it's kind of like, you know, what makes you interested in something is almost the same question. I think that if you spend a lot of time thinking about stuff and doing that stuff that you're then thinking about, I think it's almost inevitable you'll get better at it. At least I hope so. For me, I think the technology aspect of making music, understanding sound, therefore it kind of all falls into itself of, you know, you'll watch concert recaps. Oh, how is that done? Right? What's the technology of the video that they work with, and who are the people involved? How do they get started, and how do they network and get into a position where they can even be the guy holding the camera? I think that kind of thing, you tend to only see it when it's already done. Which is to say, there have been so many layers and so many steps that someone has taken to get into a position where they can be the guy holding the camera at the show, that it almost seems unimaginable that who do you talk to do that kind of, there's no job application for that.
Fair.
You're part of what is probably a BTS crew that was contracted out by whatever events company was.
BTS is behind the scenes.
Sorry. I'll try not to use too much lingo.
Yeah. Well, isn't there like a Korean like pop band as well?
I don't know.
Yes. So not them.
I'm not talking about a Korean pop band, just for clarity. But yes, they've been contracted out to film that, and those people will probably have their own hiring process of film grads and whoever else was into that. But that's not always the same story, because it depends on what the event is. It might just be a friend of a friend who, oh yeah, I know that guy shoots video, why don't I get him to come over? It's never so simple as how do I find myself being in the position of to be the one to do the documenting for an event, either microphones or video or both. What I came to find is that the story is so different every single time that you may as well just find your own path in doing the stuff that you like to do. And it just so happened that you had this sort of inkling to do this show. I was already interested in the recording technology aspect of it. I had an okay amount of experience with video, but I kind of had to get a little bit further into that. But I guess to backpedal a little bit, I just sort of have to follow where my interests are. And I think in the same way that musicians have to follow whatever genre or style that they want to do, where you'll just make time to research something if you care about it. you know, between the 5 minutes or 10 minutes on the bus, or if you're just on the bathroom, like, oh, I need something to read. Maybe I'll read a forum about cameras, or I'll read a thread about lenses and stuff. And it's not that one particular thread that I read, or not what that one particular video that I edited or whatever, but it's kind of the summary of all the times that I was trying to solve a problem and didn't know how to solve it. And so you just Google around 1,000 times, and eventually you'll kind of have some, you know, resolution about how to achieve a particular job. Even to something as specific as color grading involved knowing what software was even responsible for that. Like how do you even affect the image of something like that? And so you started on, oh, it's DaVinci Resolve. That's what everyone uses. And then, oh, this is really hard. Okay, so I'm going to have to learn foundationally how to edit video and how to make that all work. And what I started out with was a concept of that I wanted the video to look a certain way. But then there was 5 other problems that I needed to solve to get to the point where I could do that, because you need all this extra foundational knowledge about like computers, about filming and framing, and just understanding what makes a good looking video or a bad looking video. So I think even a lot of the time we spent watching VFX breakdowns and stuff for us to understand like what's good color, what's good movement, what's good motion and stuff, on a microscopic level does affect the decisions you make for producing other content, in the same way that if you're listening to a really good recording of something, maybe it isn't the sound you're particularly caring about at that particular time, but you might hear little things that the artist does that you really resonate with. You carry around that little point whatever percent of that with you forever, potentially. And I think that would be kind of my answer, is that it wasn't one thing. It was just an ongoing interest in the subject of, let's say, documenting technology in general, that really, it didn't ever go away. So I figured, well, the healthiest thing to do is that I know I can do something with this if I get up to a level that is, I guess, marketable, or whatever you want to call it, like up to a point where it wouldn't be the thing of like anyone could just do it. Like it's sufficiently far removed from that I just picked up a camera, and I figured that would lead somewhere, whether or not that made me money directly or whatever. I think it's okay to have hobbies and to have stuff that you're interested in, and whether or not, you know, filming and doing all this other stuff makes me money is kind of almost like a non-factor for me, because I just think it's cool to investigate the possibilities of what your skill sets can be. And if you like something and it's not like a destructive habit that you have, I don't know, you may as well spend some time learning about it. You never know who you'll meet, what you'll do, what gig you have, or whatever.
I think too, it's interesting that you point out that, like, even like, for example, like getting a gig on like being like a film guy, like a concert at a BTS concert.
Specifically BTS for a BTS concert?
Yeah. My guess is that because the world changes so quickly in this modern age, that like, even if there was a specific strict career path where you had to like go to school and then follow this exact path to get from like point A to point B and to get this kind of job, maybe that was a thing in the past. And I'm sure, you know, that's obviously still the case for certain jobs, like, you know, if you want to be a doctor or whatever. But it seems like more and more people are able to bring value into this world in ways that you don't necessarily know how to get to that path. And as you say, like, for everybody, that path is different. And I like just the feeling of like following an interest and like curiosity, because I feel like I didn't really end up doing too much of that. Or I guess maybe I did, but I feel like I really kind of like suppressed that curiosity of doing things that I'm interested in, because I was so like, well, no, I have to go to a good school and I have to get good grades and I have to get a corporate job and I have to work 9 to 5. And as you know, these are things that I was doing up until very recently. And now I'm kind of in the plunge of like, well, what happens if I actually just, you know, and this is so cheesy to say, but yeah, like follow my heart, follow my passion, knowing that, you know, maybe it won't work out. Maybe I won't make a living from it. Maybe whatever it was, but that whole kind of life is short. You should at least try to do things that you're interested in if you can, if you have that luxury, I guess. It does feel like, you know, a bit of a luxury once you've, you know, you're not, you know, luckily, like, you know, walking 3 hours in Africa to get like a bucket of water or whatever. I can think about these things of like following my passion or whatever, but
well, let's start somewhere, because hypothetically, there is still that hike that you have to do for anything you want to do. And I promise you, I've put my time into riding public transit to jobs that I didn't want to go to.
Yeah.
But these are just the things you do.
Yeah.
Because very rarely are you going to be in a position where stuff is just handed to you. And when it is handed to you, you very rarely know what to do with it.
Right.
And it is almost always the case that if you've had a hard go at it where it was not going anywhere for you, a total flounder type of thing. Take Quentin Tarantino, for example. It's not like he just blew up in the Hollywood scene. He made a bunch of stuff that no one cared about for a while until he didn't with Reservoir Dogs. He finally stuck that one out. And for anyone who's interested, watch the Joe Rogan episode on it because it's really interesting.
Oh yeah, Quentin was on the Joe Rogan podcast. It was really interesting. I had no idea that he was like that he like worked in a video store like all throughout his 20s and really only just kind of like hit in his 30s, which is really inspiring for us when we see like, you know, 18-year-olds or like the Billie Eilishes of the world. We're like, amazing, power to you, but like I'm much older.
That's not really reality for most people, right? It happens, but you can't bank on that.
Right.
And the only reason that did happen for Billie Eilish is because I bet that she was just following her passion first and creating the art that she wanted to create. And because it was so exceptional, it really worked out for her because people resonated with that in a big way. You just don't know if stuff is going to come to you or not. So you can't go into a creative endeavor with that expectation, at least not until you've done it to a point where people really care and you have an audience that follows you around everywhere. But that's different because that breeds its own complacency of, oh, I've guaranteed sales. I'm always going to sell tickets. I'm always going to sell whatever product I have. I'm going to make a return on this. That can make you lazy if you're not hungry enough to find the next endeavor. We watched a Ben Jordan video about this exact thing. The 7 stages of becoming a professional musician, I think is not unlike a lot of people's journey with being creative people. Of, you know, realizing that the world's a very big place. There is room for you in it, but you've got to earn it. And it often isn't clear how many years you're going to have to grind that out until you finally get a bit of momentum in that direction. That could be 5, it could be 10, I don't know. But sometimes you do have to give up on stuff. If it's really not panning out, you spent 10 years trying super hard and you've tried all these different avenues on it. Maybe the market's just not ready for it yet. That thing or this style of, you know, this genre of creativity that you're in might not be the right thing at this particular time. And that might not even be your fault. It's just people aren't on that headspace right now. And there's other things that I am undoubtedly sure that someone who's creative enough to find themselves stuck in a rut in one niche, they can't pivot to a different niche and then try more of their inspirations and more of their creativity. It's kind of the same thing with recording technology, branch into video technology for me is in the same way that I think if you're feeling like you're stuck in your particular junction of maybe say you're like an oil painter or something like that, that doesn't mean you can't do other stuff. Like you're probably an artistic person and why not try something related but not exactly the same. It's always easier to do a logical jump from a related field than to say, well, the creative thing isn't good for me. I'm just going to give up on trying to be a professional whatever. I think it's healthier to kind of keep following a new lead to keep yourself inspired and to keep yourself under the gun a little bit too, where you're not just doing stuff you're comfortable with all the time. And I think that's the essence of what you've been doing recently, especially is, you know, essentially what can you do to put yourself in the hot seat by a few more % every day. And I think that's really paid out for you because I feel like you're in a much better headspace now.
Yeah, well, I mean, like outside of creativity as well, and I must have said this on a previous episode, but just this one quote that always really gets me is that whole, it's not the strongest to survive, but the most adaptable to change, like in relation to animals, humans, whatever, like businesses, like that's the whole thing, like where you can be doing the same business or selling the same product for 40 years and it works out great. And then the market changes, the world changes. And if you're not adapting and learning how to adapt and changing and that kind of thing, then like you are, what was successful last year may no longer actually work out for you. And boy, life, eh?
Yeah. Things change so rapidly that you can pretty much put that into the category of the only guarantee you have is change. And good or bad.
Yeah.
But change is going to happen. And I sort of relate it it's maybe doesn't seem obvious, but I think you can draw a really good parallel there to how good games get for consoles, where the change is coming. And what I mean by that is games that come out when a console first launches, the PlayStation 2, for example, they don't know what they're doing with that thing. It's such a mysterious black box of code and little chips and processes that do their own particular little job. And the game developers are sitting there beside themselves trying to figure out how do I write code for this thing? So the games don't feel as good. They don't play as well. The whole thing just feels very rough and very unpolished. But as the console gets older and older, they've worked with it more and more. They discover all these techniques that they can use to better optimize all of that. And then right around the corner, PS3 is coming. I guess all this knowledge that I've put together over the past 5, 6, 7 years of development is just irrelevant now.
Right.
I've mastered this console and it's no longer being developed, manufactured, or sold. It's just dead. And that's a very good analogy to how music works, or to how business works, or to how anything works, is that you'll get really super good at your particular niche, and then the whole thing is going to get flipped over on its head every 5 to 7 years or so. And you're going to have to totally rebuild your tool set. You'll get also super good at that again. And then guess what? It's a cyclical thing. And yeah, change is inevitable. And I think you said it well. It's the businesses that adapt that aren't necessarily trying to just squeeze every little dollar out of some little thing that they're trying to do, but rather, how can we be in a market we're not in right now? And maybe it doesn't work out half the time, but it just has to work out a couple of times for it to really pay you back. And if you don't overextend yourself and you just say, well, I'm going to be present here, I'm not going to go so hard on this, but I want to try this out. New food category, new something like that, all of a sudden you're the new leader in that market because you were there at the right place, the right time. Classic story of any business or of any person who happened to talk to the right dude or something like that happened. You were just ready enough to take that on. You had all these things you had no idea how to do, but you were the one who was able to say yes in that exact time. And so it just worked out for you because you kind of were collecting the pieces of yourself as you just realized that, oh my God, this thing is such a huge challenge. I'm going to have to learn how to do, but thank God I was here at this time. And businesses and people who run those probably feel exactly the same way of, oh, I landed this opportunity. I wasn't expecting this to really take off, so we're going to have to scramble and figure out how we're going to actually meet the demand here. And sometimes you only meet it about halfway, but it's way better than if you didn't even bother. So yeah, I totally agree. Being adaptable is so important.
It seems to me that that kind of mindset is so, like, from what I know about your life's journey and that sort of thing, like, it seems to me that having that mindset, it explains a lot of why you have so many different skills. Just, you're speaking about like game development and that kind of thing also reminded me that, you were really into computers for a really long time and you're so self-taught in that kind of realm. And then more recently, you've been adapting and like creating and learning how to create like digital products and kind of like coding your own freaking plugins and that kind of thing. And that's really inspiring to me because it's not like you went to school for computer science, but with the right amount of perseverance and time and curiosity and interest, you've been teaching yourself how to do it. And you've, without, I guess, teasing too much of like kind of what's coming. I know that you've been working really hard at that. And so I really commend you. And I just really admire you for doing that.
Thanks, man. That was a true, I think, Goggins moment I had of just no excuses, just get it done, figure out how to do it.
David Goggins?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. For our listeners, definitely gotta... I am personally very inspired by David Goggins, so me and Tyr talk about him a lot. He's very like... I try not to swear on this podcast if I can avoid it, but he's very like... somebody that went through like the most tragic like hardships in life and then... turned his life around, went from like, obesity and like abuse and that kind of thing to just like Navy SEAL, world record holder for like the most pull-ups or something like that in like 18 hours. And like all of his Instagram videos, like he's talking, but like while running. So the videographer is like running beside him. But anyway, so super inspiring. And you were saying that the Goggins method kind of inspired you there as well.
Essentially, yeah. And I can't take too much credit for the whole plugin thing. It was made in Max for Live, which is quasi-programming. Excuse me. It's kind of a visual programming environment where if you want to do a particular thing, let's say add two numbers together just to keep it simple, you would call upon an adding object. And then you can give it what's called arguments, or what are the parameters that you want to modify. So if you have a number, you feed it in one side, and then whatever number you want to be added into that, you feed it into the other side. So if it's starting with 2 and you feed it 3, 5 will come out the other side. You can expand that out to be a lot of different things. Adding filters, adding knobs, adding whatever entities you want to exist within there. But as long as you understand what you want to do, chances are you can just hit N and go search and look for whatever module you want. Maybe you don't find what it's called the first time around, but I didn't know to look up ZL to look up lists, but that's how you sort lists, is with an object called ZL. Beats me, but point is, I'm sure that there's logical reasons why the modules in there are called what they're called, but dummy me doesn't know that deep level type of understanding stuff, and they use a lot of terminology that's like shared with the programming language C and Java, and it's just a little alien to me, but that's not a problem. Like I knew that there were sound effects that I wanted to be able to do without having to necessarily either buy some other plugin to do it. But I wanted it to feel a little more integrated with Ableton. So that's kind of what I set out to do, because it's genuinely what I was working on was not available. And where it was, you had to pay a lot of money to get the hardware to emulate that. And then never mind the plugin you have to buy after the fact. I don't want to trash talk any companies in particular, but there are definitely companies who are happy to take $800-900 from you to do what I was trying to do for way less than that. And I think out of necessity comes that need to figure out it on your own. Because on principle, I just don't feel good about spending that much money on getting one particular sound effect that I wanted. So I thought it would help probably other people who had the same thought of, well, the sound effects are out there, the tools are out there, but I wonder if I can do this just at a slightly more accessible level, and I don't need to be a total wizard to know how to do it. But I don't know, like you just put on talking heads really loud and then just bashed away on the keyboard until I found what I was looking for over, I don't even know, 2-3 months or something like that. Of just figuring out how do I make a plugin? And that's not something you can Google it, but you're not going to get very far, because it's kind of like, how do I be in shape? There's answers, but you're going to have to find an approach that works for you. So that's kind of what I did with that. But yeah, digital content creation is kind of my new paradigm. Now that I feel like I'm comfortable with all these other things that I've been doing for a long time, it's the comfort that I actively avoid, where I don't feel like I'm doing anything anymore if I already have a grasp on all these different things. I have to be learning about some other subject, and 99 times out of 100, I'll look into something, this is kind of boring, I don't really care about that. And then you just keep skipping along until you find something, oh, okay, well, there's something here, and then you follow that inspiration. And the classic story, I think, of a lot of people who are just curious. But yeah, content creation's been rewarding and interesting, because I'm having to flex a lot of muscles that are very underdeveloped right now with understanding, because I've done editing for loops and stuff, but recording that and creating good, readable, usable presets and things of that nature, I'm not so experienced in that. So it's a new skill set that I have to try to develop, but I identified the problem of, I don't feel like I get a lot of my money's worth when I use a lot of content packs, and I can identify what problems I have with those content packs, and then I'm just sure to never repeat those. And, it's just kind of, I guess, being aware of the fact that there are probably more than just a couple of people like you in the world that have similar problems to you, and how can you do the maximum amount of good and help people in your position of either mostly just being unable to make that content for themselves, or being too time pressed to do it, which is effectively the same thing. And how can I create value for a small amount of money that might save you 100 or more hours of work to try to do? And so, you know, I won't go too deep into what specifically it is that we're talking about here, but we're going to have an exciting few months for sure. Yeah. And I really look forward to it.
Yeah, it's interesting with the self-taught thing too, because I guess like prior to this example with like the developing that kind of thing, and I do say development because like even you're talking about like the Max for Live kind of thing, like all of that is like logic, and from what I understand, like logic is what's behind a lot of like coding and computer science and that kind of thing. And I remember you kind of expressed to me a couple of times as well of like you're having to figure out this like problem of logic and how to get it to work in Max for Live. So I still definitely commend you for that. And so in advance of kind of this recent venture, you spent many years getting really good, if I may say so myself, at music production, mixing and mastering and sound editing and that kind of thing. You've completely changed my whole kind of career trajectory when it comes to vocal recording and editing. And I think it's also really cool that, you know, well, there's a couple of things here. One is that from what I remember, like music wasn't your like childhood passion. Like for a lot of people, it's like, you know, their earliest memory is like music and like that's it. They knew what their passion was. And for you, I know that it was a little bit later that you had that sort of passion sparked. And from what I also remember, you did attend for a while one of those like post-secondary like educational institutes for audio engineering and that kind of thing. And I remember we've chatted a little bit about kind of what the pros and cons of that kind of schooling is. You know, I definitely don't want to be one of those like education haters. I definitely think that there is a time and a place and certain skill sets that need to be taught in schools. And then also a lot of people, like myself included, that I do learn better when I'm being taught, and that, you know, you also kind of had an example of like, you know, you're kind of going through things and like this is getting boring, so you move on. For me, I feel like a lot of my schooling was like just getting through the boring parts, even though I hate it, like that sort of thing. And so I feel like there is this balance between where is there a place for education? And I'm seeing more and more, like when it comes to music and sound engineering, and I guess particularly like in the digital space, that when you end up going to a school for something like that, for most people, it ends up being a huge, huge loss of money, and you're not really necessarily in a better place. Like you don't, you know, I think a lot of what they like advertise as well is like, you know, you're going to have access to our alumni network and you're going to get like gigs and that kind of thing. But in the music industry, when that's like really saturated, then like, you know what I mean? So however, you did learn a lot while you were there. And from what I understand, like that really jump-started like why you are good at a lot of the things that you're good at. So I'd love to kind of like backtrack, maybe talk a little bit about kind of like what you were like as a kid, some things that you were interested back then, and kind of your journey towards music.
Sure. I would say that I think I've always been a music appreciator, of course, like anyone else. It's like saying I like having fun. Yeah. But I like the craft of making interesting music, and I thought that was always really, it's a great discovery process when you find a new song that really catches your ear. I know anyone can relate to when they just find a thing that's like, oh, this is really unlike anything else. I got to bookmark that, playlist it, or do something like that. The music, I guess, creation journey, yeah, it didn't really end up going anywhere until I went to the school that I went to for audio stuff, because I didn't have a concept of even what software or approaches or techniques would be used for such a thing. And if the one piece of credit I can give that experience is that I wouldn't have had at least some foundational framework to understand what editing is and what pieces of software are and are not industry standard, and what techniques people tend to gravitate towards when they do these types of jobs. I know it's nebulous, but it's kind of, audio editing is also nebulous because it depends on what you're doing. But I started out in Pro Tools when I was working there, when I can hear the groans already in the comments already. But I quickly saw the light and switch over to Ableton Live because that was not really my speed. And I don't like paying Avid $500 a year. So, but that experience by and large, if I was just able to extract the Ableton Live course that was included with that, that would have already been enough for me. And if I could have done it for like a 20th of the cost and just taken that. But again, you don't know what you don't know. So for me, I had to go through the process of what I would call screwing up my trajectory. I mean, it's only 20, right? So it's not, what do you know? But at the same time, I still had to make the wrong decision. Meet some cool people along the way. It's not like I met nobody, but there were a few contacts that I made, some tricks that I picked up, and some good experiences that I had. So fair enough. Like, it wasn't a total waste, but I just wish it wasn't expensive as it was. And that would be kind of my advice to a lot of people considering this type of thing, whether it be going to like film school or audio school, whatever it is. Chances are that you can probably learn what you want to learn now on YouTube. That wasn't necessarily true when back in 2010, like early proto YouTube type of stuff. I mean, the information was out there, but there was a lot of wrong stuff too, because the market wasn't so saturated with knowledgeable people. Now it's different. 12 years later, the content creation landscape is just a completely different place. And what's amazing about people, especially like Alan, for example, who's
our boy Stranger.
Yeah, Stranger, big up to Stranger, right? His ability to communicate information for a lot of people now is vital, because they're learning how to make music from the ground up using both the tools that he has for sale, which is how he supports himself, and giving you on top of those tools tons and tons of hours of free content on how to either use those tools specifically or how to just think about music creation as an art, and as well as the technical stuff of here is what button you click, here is what specific thing you do. I identify with that really hard, because that was what I needed at the outset. What button do I click? What does the wrench icon do? I have no idea. Like that bewildering feeling when you first open up Ableton, and you had this experience too of, this is weird. Like there's a whole lot of buttons and a whole lot of me knowing not what to do here. And but once I gave you enough of a kind of just a gentle push into Ableton, you were able to then figure out a lot of the stuff on your own, and also discern what parts you were interested in and what parts you weren't. Like synths and EQs and compressors and whatever else. I know you get that conceptually, but that's not your jam, because what you're using it for is entirely different. It's for editing and for like comping and putting stuff together. And that's great, because Ableton doesn't have to be for making music. It's for anything. But as far as probably the first audio editing I ever did was, I'll be vague because I don't know exactly when, but it was probably in maybe like grade 10 or something like that, when I had, it was some sort of software suite that was related to Nero. This is going back pretty far here.
I haven't heard that word in forever.
Yeah, it was related to Nero, but it was some audio editing tool that was in that software package. And honestly, I don't know too much about it, but it was some program that I had access to. Whether it was pirated, it could have been, I don't know. But I managed to figure out in that software how to beat match two pieces of music and filter them and then play them at the same speed as a mashup.
Okay.
In very loose terms. I don't have this file anymore, unfortunately.
Okay, that was my first question.
But it was two pop songs that I can't quite remember. I think it was like probably JT and maybe DJ Khaled, if I had to guess. Whatever was hot at the time, right? I mean, this is the music you listen to when you're what, like 14 or 15 or something like that. But that was my first ever edit, in a million quotation marks, that I ever did. And honestly, the experience of doing something so silly like that can be kind of cathartic at the end of it, because you did a thing.
Sure.
As silly as it is, you did a thing.
It's fun.
And you exported a piece of music that you made. In reality, you didn't do much, but I think that kind of, I don't forget that moment, because it was truly the first time where I ever did something sound related on a computer. That wasn't just me like ripping a CD or downloading from LimeWire or something. Like I understood the concept of how to install video games and how to waste time. I was very good at that. But as far as doing something creative on the computer, that was a bit far and few between, because I didn't have the knowledge or the experience to know what software is out there to do that with. And Ableton existed at the time, in like early proto you know, Ableton 5 or something like that. But I wouldn't have known that. And besides, I didn't really care about music production anyway. I just thought that was kind of fun. For a long time, I spent time just in Photoshop, becoming a bit of a Photoshop wizard with retouching photographs, understanding like color correction and color balance and framing and whatever else, and cleaning up stuff. A lot of kids had a similar experience. They're like, how do I remove dust and speckles from my photograph? And as it turns out, there's a tool called Clone Stamp, which now we've all heard of. But as a younger kid, when you find out that you can hold the Alt key and sample from a different part of a photograph to then replace that from somewhere else, I still used that trick for the Accelerate album artwork, where when Alan and I took that photo, I'm sure we can flash it on the screen or something like that, but that particular photo doesn't look nearly as nice on the unedited version. And so what I ended up doing is that same thing that I learned how to do when I was like 16 or something like that, of clone stamping bits of the image and airbrushing it by hand. Instead of, you know, using a paintbrush, however people do it now with compositing, but I did it old school, like 2005 style of just grab a piece, resample it. Oh, there's a bit that isn't quite off here, resample it, clone stamp it out. So I did, in fact, keep using that skill well into my adult life. And I guess a lot of the things that I do are kind of extensions of that same sort of goofing around turned into something quasi-professional, arguably. Retouching a photograph for an album art's not like that.
Well, and just for you folks, Accelerate is Tyr's debut full-length album. You had a bunch of EPs before that, but that was a huge mastercraft piece that came out last year.
Shout out Mastercraft.
Yes. On a Stranger's label, Deviant Audio. And huge album. And you're right, it's pretty iconic album artwork. And you're right, the photography thing. I remember, I guess I've also seen like photos that you took when you were like 7 or 8 years old that like your grandparents hung up.
Oh, right. So for context, it was basically they let me loose on one of their early Kodak digital cameras that they had bought at the time. I think it was a whopping 4 megapixels. All those pixels. what a world of opportunity you have. But as a kid, you don't really give a crap, right? It's just it's a thing. It can take pictures and you can do silly things with it. And I guess that was probably arguably my earliest experience with photography was actually, well, before that, correction, they had bought a, I want to say Sony branded camcorder that used high 8 tape. Okay. Which is just a really old format for recording stuff. But that was, I think that's my earliest one. I just remember being so fascinated with the fact that you could zoom in 200 times. on stuff.
Imagine you being like a little kid and just like having fun with the zoom.
Literally just like not recording a single thing, just zooming in and zooming out. And like, look at how crazy this thing is, right? And it had probably a whole 45 minutes of battery life on it, but I didn't care because it's just like a shiny thing that you just mess around with. And it did teach me, I think, a little bit about how cameras worked and the language that they speak insofar as what menu setting, what ISO does and like what frame rate does. And you kind of get it, but like you don't really know what you're looking for. It's just like, oh, I'll just pick this setting and hope that it works out. You just goof around with it. But I guess that's probably the earliest experience I had was with old camcorders. And I recently came across a channel called Cathode Ray Dude, who talks at very great length about these camcorders for an hour. He goes to Goodwill and collects them.
Awesome.
I just think that that's hilarious. I love that. And so he just has all these Sony and various like JVC camcorders, and he'll show you how these stupid things work with their really weird menu systems and stuff like that. And it's just using the modern conveniences of cameras. You think like, oh my God, that wouldn't have made sense to anybody. Never mind someone who like knows about cameras and like understands this kind of thing. And I love looking back on that stuff now. Of it is no mystery why your parents or people your parents' age would have had such an incredibly difficult time with that type of technology, because it just doesn't make any sense. Like it barely makes sense now. But yeah, I don't know. I think I just liked picking up things that were shiny and loud and seeing what they did. And yeah, you know, a lot of people have that experience, right? The first time you get your first Casio keyboard, you're making all sorts of sounds. on that and seeing what that can do. And I know you enjoyed having I think yours is Casio branded or something like that.
It's a Yamaha, but no, you're absolutely right. That was like literally one of my very first memories as a kid is just like, like keyboards and like, oh my goodness, they make these cool sounds and I can change to a different synth. And then if I press this, it'll like play a song, and then while it's playing a song, I'll like make up a dance and like things you do as
well, there's
kids.
Pictures
like,
of you making like your dance. That's so
fun. Entertainment post dinner for my family, like required entertainment. Like I would go put on an outfit and like make them like.
It was a whole production.
This is
You've been doing shows your whole life. Really.
Exactly. But it's interesting too that like you as a child have like. I think for a lot of us, like it's that kind of like fascination with whatever it is you're fascinated with as a kid. And then as you get older, I guess, like I think most of us lose that kind of like the thing of like just playing or just exploring. And I've definitely had to.
Because it seems like people do kind of have these creative streaks in them, but maybe it gets redirected. But
I would say that because I feel like, and this is sort of speaking to what we talked about earlier as well, which is I feel like I suppressed so much of that, and so much of my life was like, you know, told from society and some family pressures as well that like being an artist or being a musician isn't like a thing to do. Oh, sorry. We're in cottage country and there's some like nature distractions which are not usual like in the but yeah, I definitely was very sensitive to the you know, being a musician, being a creative person. This is just a hobby. You need to focus on like what are you going to be good at in school, like what's going to be your education, your career. And so I feel like so much of my life was just like suppressing the creative urge. And then even when I did, and I mean, it is still a hobby, like I'm not like, you know, full-time professional making money from music or anything like that. But even when I, you know, over the last 10 years have been creative, like, and we've talked about this before too, where sometimes I take it too seriously, where I'm like spending like 60 hours on like one melody line and like banging my head against the wall and like forgetting to have fun and to kind of go with the flow and explore. And then as soon as I let go and like kind of go into that mode, then things start to happen. And so it's almost like I'm applying that kind of very rigid, or the rigidity to like, you know, something that is kind of the opposite. And that's kind of like creativity is, being imaginative and creating something new and yeah.
Well, yeah, again, and it probably is the case that maybe the adult mindset isn't by default compatible with that because I think you're more used to routine and you want to do the things that you're efficient at, and your brain isn't really wired in this way anyway. You would prefer to get things done quickly, even if you're doing it the wrong way and it overall takes more time to do it this way. You would rather just do it in the way that you're familiar with doing it. And that's such a classic problem of people, right? Like, let me show you this new technique. Oh, no, I'd rather just keep doing it this way. It's like, well, no, like this will save you time if you just want to spend 20 minutes doing it. No, it's too complicated. And what I try to never be that guy that says, no, that's too complicated, I don't want to learn about it. Or if I do say that, there's generally a reason because I'm already entrenched in some other thing and I just can't. But I guess what you're pointing at is just that inflexibility that can set in as you become more experienced at just being a person, where you feel like you have it all figured out, and then, you know, you don't want something to mess up that balance for you too much, lest you feel too human, you know, and like, oh, I really don't know very much, and I'd really just the breadth of what I know is just about enough to get by my little niche that I've carved out for myself. But then if I step outside of that bound, it all falls apart again. You feel like a kid again. I'm totally outside of my zone. I have no idea what's going on. Everything is so bright and new, and I have no idea. And I just remembered because I just I guess more succinctly answer your question before about like what started that musical journey. I forgot a piece. So Neuro, yes, like when I did that edit before. But I can say for a fact that what got me interested in music, and it's just been 24 years since I had this thing in my life. But one of my dad's friends named Adrian, he was a wicked bass player, by the way. We hung up with him in Nova Scotia a couple of years ago, Adrian Robichaud. He bought me a Casio SK1. And anyone who's it's a keyboard, and anyone who's a synth nerd will know what an SK1 is. It's basically a keyboard with, I believe, 8 preset sounds, like an organ and a piano, blah blah. But it had something that no other keyboard at that time had: sampling.
Oh, wow.
So what you could do, and this is a keyboard from the mid 80s, mind you, it had 1.4 seconds of very low quality sampling. And of course, what do you figure? A very little kid
fart
set whatever sounds you can imagine were sampled and played back on that keyboard. And it had this little electret crap microphone on there, but it didn't matter because you could just yell into it. You could play some other sound into it and it would make a sound to let you know when it's done sampling. And that would get mapped across the keyboard.
Oh my gosh.
Played at whatever pitch you wanted. The keyboard could play 4 different voices at once. So in other words, you could play 4 different keys before it would just snap to another key if you played a 5th one. All sorts of fun was had sampling stuff and playing that back at different
I can only
pitches
imagine.
and tempo. And as a kid, you find whatever silly thing you can find and then do that. But I only realized it after the fact. I'm like, no, I felt like I'm missing something to this answer here. And sure enough, I have to give Adrian credit for that, for buying me an SK1, which in 1996 is what I would have gotten that. That would have been a pretty expensive gift to get. Like it wasn't a $20 thing you get at Walmart. I think they were probably selling for maybe $150 or something like that. Yeah, getting my first keyboard really kind of set that in motion for me. Now, I never really learned to play like you play or other musicians do, but I think the idea of taking sound and manipulating it and turning it into something else in your own creation, because you could play the sounds really, really pitched down using the octave keys or just going lower on the keyboard. So you might be able to take, sped up audio and then play it back at its normal speed for longer than what normally the sampling would allow for, if you're okay to take the hit on quality, or vice versa. Play a slowed down sound at a much higher quality if you're okay to take the hit on the amount of sampling time that you can do. But I think that kind of got my head working in the right way to think about what is sampling and what is key and what is pitch. And it was through using that keyboard that I even came to discover that I had what people call perfect pitch, which is that I could always remember the key of every song that I heard, which I didn't think was anything unusual. I still don't. Like, it's kind of still hard for me to conceptualize.
Oh, it's so bizarre for you guys listening. Like, he's so, sometimes I'll just like hum out loud, like whatever song is in my head. And he'll be like, you're doing it in the wrong key. I'm like, how do you even know? You're like, we haven't even listened to the song. And like,
and so let me ask you this, like logically speaking, here's why I don't think it's such or why I don't understand why that's a rare thing. You can remember what color something was. Right, you know what color your car is, you know what color the grass is, and you understand how things are made up and how they look. The key of something, the pitch of something is like an immutable quality to the music itself. Like middle C sounds like middle C. It doesn't sound like anything else. And that's why it's hard for me to grasp. Like, you can understand that your shirt is black in the same way that I can understand, a bunch of your tracks are in F minor. It's just how that sounds to me is the same way when you think about an object that you have in your mind, you can remember its shape and what its shades are and all the different details it might have, to varying degrees of memory, of course. But that's how I think about sound, is the pitch of it is much like any other detail of how fast it is, who sang in it, and whatever else. But it's I only learned much later in my life that is not something people can remember, and that you can't be taught how to remember it. Kind of like if you ask someone to grow a third finger, if it's been cut off or something like that, it's just not going to happen. And it's very strange to me. I feel like that's kind of a flaw in evolution, that people can't remember that.
That's interesting that you compare it to color, because it makes me think then, I guess maybe you're like, when you're hearing sound, you're really hearing like the frequency, because with color, like I get, and this is going to show like how vaguely I understand science, but like we see different colors because the light is at different wavelengths. Is that the correct? Okay, thank goodness.
To be more specific,
it's
whatever wavelength of light was not absorbed by that is whatever makes it back into your eyes.
Okay. So
but minor detail, but
something to do with frequencies.
Yeah.
So then when you're hearing sound, I guess you're just really like hearing the difference in the frequencies, I guess, or like you're remembering the actual, because just like comparing it to the color analogy, right? Like I remember colors, but like I guess I'll remember how a song sounds and like the melody of it, but because you can sing that melody in different keys, higher, lower, I guess my mind just gravitates towards whichever key I can sing it in. And I'll sing the same melody, but it'll be like likely in a different key because I don't remember what the original key was.
And that's really strange for me to think about.
Wow.
Because how would you know how far the notes are apart if you don't know where the notes started?
So that's an interesting thing because it was the only way I was able to do back when I was doing like classical piano exams with the conservatory and that kind of thing. Part of your exam every year is what they call like sight reading, as well as I can't remember, like hearing exercises or something to that effect. And so there's a bunch of different things that the adjudicator would do. And one of them was they would play an interval. And so an interval is like the space between two notes, and there's different
or more
different spacings. And so you'd have to say like, okay, this is a perfect fifth, this is a major third, and I would not be able to tell you what notes those are, and that's what you could do with perfect pitch. I couldn't tell you what those notes are, but if I could hear the this interval between the two notes by relating it to a popular song. And this isn't something I came up with, like my piano teacher taught me this, but like, for example, I think perfect fourth is "Oh Christmas Tree," like "Oh Christmas Tree."
Right.
I think that's perfect fourth. So then if I heard that like familiar like melody, like that's how I knew it was a perfect fourth, but I couldn't like, this is the only way. Or like perfect fifth, I could hear like the third in between it, but I couldn't tell you like what key it was in or anything like that. I can just sort of hear the spacing in between.
That's just such a nebulous and unusual way to think about music, where for some reason you can remember how far the notes are from each other, but not the origin point. That's really strange.
It's all relative. The relativity between the notes, man.
Well, yeah, and I mean, like I get it insofar as like you can sort of sing to yourself all the individual notes of a minor chord in whatever key, but yeah, I guess I never put two and two together, that it wasn't clear that if some, minor chord was coming from the key of F or E or A or whatever it is. I just sort of figured that that's just something everyone could remember, because people could clearly sing songs in transposed keys. So it's like, why would they not know then where the key was the whole time? In the same way you could remember what color the door was in your house. But I don't know. I guess that it's just like a weird curse or a gift or whatever you want to call it.
No, you're one of those like genetic like superhumans, and I guess mutant. I can talk to you for a very long time. We have a lot more to get through for sure. I definitely want to have you on more often. I know we've talked about some other possible special formats down the road, so you guys might not be hearing/seeing Tyr for the last time. But just to wrap things up here, because I do have to pee a little bit, so I apologize if I'm rushing that. Frequent urination is going to officially go into my bio.
We need a charity to end frequent urination. This is a real problem.
Yes. I want to ask you, if there's something that, if you could tell yourself as a kid, or perhaps even, the kids of today, music or not music related, if there was one piece of advice you could give to the youths, what would it be?
I don't know if it'd be one, because there's so much good stuff that you should know. I would say number one would be, I'll try to keep it to maybe two-ish answers, because there's so many important things that I wish I knew earlier. But number one is that try not to stress too much about the future if you can all help it, because it's going to happen anyway, and whether you like it or not. So you just have to be more adaptable than you are preventative, if you can sometimes. Now, pound a cure, ounce of prevention, we all know the classic saying, but you should worry about your future maybe half as much if you're really, really stressed out about how everything is going to perfectly fall into place. Because even if you have this plan from top to bottom that you think is going to be adhered to and followed through step by step, I promise you that something is going to get in the way of that, and that's going to have to force you to change your plans mid-plan. Instead of coming into it from the mindset of all of this is going to get completely buggered up, I may as well just have a concept of what I want to do and then start with that. And then that's always how I've taken on projects, if that I know roughly what I want to do, but then the execution of it, I kind of just have to make up as I go. So that'd be advice number one, is that do plan for the future, but try not to take it so personally when every single little thing doesn't quite go your way, because it's never going to go your way. So you just have to kind of, you know, be willing to move around like a boxer does whenever the punches are coming in, because that's all you can do sometimes. Number two is start investing, like now, especially if you're someone who's made 15, 16, you have your first job or mowing lawns or at a grocery store, that kind of thing. Go get yourself an investment account on your investment platform of choice. I'm not going to recommend anything in particular. You and I use a particular service, but that does not mean it's the best one. And it might not even be available where you live. But start investing in either self-directed if you're really interested, but more often than not, you're going to want to have like ETFs and just general like amalgamated investments that include hundreds of stocks, depending on what you're invested in. But there are a lot of services, and I'll name a couple just to kind of direct people what I'm talking about, like Wealthsimple, Questrade, those types of things. There's a lot of applications now, very reputable, that will require a lot of information from you to make sure that you're not, you know, anyone suspicious. But once you give them your information, they can automatically invest for you. If you literally just e-transfer the money out of your account, it lands in that account 72 hours later, and it's automatically divvied up into some sort of investment. I wish I started doing that sooner. I was so silly to not do that, but no one ever even alluded to that was something that you should be doing right early on. And even if it's the case that you're only starting with whatever, $50 a month, like nothing amounts of money, right? Because maybe you mowed one lawn. I have no idea, but take some percentage of that money, please invest it. You will be so much better off in the times of, I wish I had $2,000 right now. Well, luckily for you, when you were 15 or 16, now you're 21, you've been putting that money into an investment account where it, not only because you're putting money in there, there was more money, but the investment itself has matured a little bit, and then the valuation of that has also increased. That will help you immensely. And that amazing thing of, compounding gains, that it doesn't matter in the year or the 2 years, but in the 5 or the 10 years, you'll be so thankful you did that. So that would be my advice number two, is please invest. You will be so thankful in 5 to 10 years from now when you really could use that money, or not. But in 20 or 30 years, whatever your plan is, you'll be way better off. I wish I started sooner. To answer your question.
That's a great answer. I think especially coming off of like a year and a half of like pandemic stuff. Like I'm sure every single person would have been grateful for like a rainy day fund, and, you know, or if you're trying to, you know, buy your first property or like whatever it is.
Take care of yourself.
That's really good advice.
You know,
it's the first time I've got that kind of advice on this podcast. So thank you for that.
I don't want to just give the same advice you can Google.
Well,
you know, things that, it's stuff that has impacted my life so vastly that I feel an obligation to tell other people. Even if 2 of you out there listening to this go and do that, that's 2 people that I hopefully have helped 10 years from now or something like that.
Beautiful.
Because I don't know, life's short. Don't keep all your good secrets to yourself. Let other people know if you can, kind of thing.
I love it.
But that's why I like the concept of this show. Other much more talented people than me can come on here and really share their insights and their expertise and their passion for the craft and the things that they like to do. So I think you're doing a good thing by lending.
Fairy?
I think that's a fairy horn. Try that again. Just lending a voice to well-educated and experienced people is always a good idea. because even if 99% of that conversation feels like rehash to you, there might be a little nugget in there that kind of puts you off in some different direction, but you just needed to be introduced to that idea first of like, oh, I didn't think about that, or I didn't realize that this is a thing, or that this could be so simple, or something like that, which is why I love listening to podcasts that are of high quality. Yours is a great show. So I should feel like you should feel good about the work that you're doing here, because I think it's worthwhile.
Well, thank you so much for that. That means a lot to me. Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for all your involvement in the show and, you know, with my vocals, with helping to produce a lot of the music that I've made. I just, for those of you folks listening, I'm going to put Tyr's social media links and things in the description. He's got a lot of amazing music, amazing tutorials. He's going to have a lot more interesting educational content and tools available for you coming up. We also have our recent single together, Sending Signals, the focus of a remix competition. I think by the time this comes out, we'll have been wrapping up our remix competition. So you'll definitely be hearing and seeing a lot more from us. Thank you so much for being here. Hope you're doing okay. Tyr, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Spreading the love and the knowledge. Go invest. Go be creative. Go have fun.
Try not to stress yourself out of making a potentially good decision as well.
Yeah.
Just try it out. You know, you never know what'll happen. It's up to you to know when that time is to do something, but you know, don't hold yourself back.
Don't hold yourself back, folks. And with that, I will not hold myself back from peeing.
All right, but thanks a lot for tuning in, guys.
Thanks for tuning in. Take care and lots of love. Mwah. Bye from cottage country.
Bye.
Bye.